to our show tonight, Polygamy, What Love Is This? I am your host, Doris Hanson, and it's a privilege to be the host of this program. We bring the polygamous beliefs of the early Mormon Church, the present-day polygamy groups, and their leadership under their critique of true and pure biblical doctrine. We are broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah, and this is a telephone call-in program. Our telephone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. And if you would prefer to communicate with us by email, you can email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. We'd love to hear from you in either way. All of our previous programs can be watched on streaming video on our website, whatloveisthis.tv. And if you would like to see our top questions that are asked on the program, you can go to whatloveisthis.tv/answers. And if the question or comment that you have is listed there, then the answer will also be there, and you won't need to call in, or you can formulate a different question. We do have a discussion a support group that we have organized to help people who have come out of polygamy group or are thinking of leaving. And we know that when someone leaves a polygamy group, it's a situation where she needs a lot of support and a strong support system, and that's what we're trying to do in our discussion groups. We've helped a lot of people. Talking is therapeutic, and there's nothing to fear when you come to a group of people who've been there and done that as well. And we do invite you, if your life has been touched by polygamy in any way, we do invite you to come to our group meetings. Our next group meeting is April 19th at 6:30 p.m. That will be on a Monday. And if you would like more information, just email us tv@aboutpolygamy.com, or you can call tonight and leave some contact information, and I'll call you back and give you the information about the meeting. You can log on to our website, shieldandrefuge.org, and on that website you can find out more about us and more about polygamy. You can donate to our ministry. It takes a lot of resources to help women and children to come out of polygamy groups, and if God lays it on your heart to help us as we are helping them, we will thank you and also thank God for the help. And if you would like to find out about our resources, how to receive the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, as well as a book on biblical polygamy, you can find that out on the website as well. To get information, if you're in a polygamy group and you would just have questions about leaving or whether you should stay, or if you would even need help to escape, we'd be happy to do that. Our toll-free number is 877-425-9993, and we will help you however we can. We'd love to talk to you about your situation, and everything that we discuss is confidential. We do hope that you enjoyed our pre-recorded program last week. It was a very fun show to record, and we hope that you enjoyed the guest as much as I did. We did receive some very interesting responses from some of our viewers, and I'm going to share a couple of those with you next week. And it was an awesome pleasure to meet so many of our viewers at the Capstone Conference a couple of weeks ago. There were many of you who were encouraging. You come up and introduced yourselves and told me your story of how you left believing in the false doctrines and the error of your previous belief system and moved into the truth of Jesus Christ. And the joy was in your words and also in your eyes and heart, and we knew that, and it's very encouraging, and I just thank you for that. We were privileged to present to the conference audience the 34 wives of Joseph Smith in a highly visible manner. It made a very sobering statement to actually see 34 women, each one representing a wife of Joseph Smith. Now, his wives ranged from the ages of 14 years old to 58 years old. And Joseph Smith himself was 36, 37, and 38 years old when he took most of those wives. We also saw the 11 men who represented the husbands who were forced to share the love of their wives with Joseph Smith, who high-handedly and in the name of God took these men's wives for himself for both time and eternity, while these women still lived with their husband. And yes, this really did make quite a statement. Actually, it was Joseph Smith who made the statement, and it's God who has interpreted that statement for us. by their fruits we shall know them. And of course the fruits continue to be produced, as we see last week's news out of Texas. Merrill Leroy Jessup, 35 years old, was sentenced to 75 years in prison, and he was fined $10,000 for sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. Now remember, Joseph Smith had two 14-year-old wives. Now this so far is the toughest sentence that the trials of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints polygamists in Texas. Polygamists believe, as their prophets Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and many of the others, that polygamy must be practiced in order for a man to become a god. All Mormon fundamentalist polygamy groups teach this, and that the more wives a man has, the greater of a god he'll become in his polygamist eternity. So you can see that polygamy really is self-serving. 8 more indictments are coming up from these men in the YFZ ranch, and the next trial should begin on April 26th, and it will be for Lehi Barlow Jeffs for sexual assault of a child. So justice continues to be served regarding the polygamists in Texas. Now on the same page, I want you to know that I've heard accusations of some people who are accusing me and accusing this show of existing for the purpose of throwing polygamist husbands and fathers in jail. That's just more fear-mongering from polygamy groups, which they are famous for. I experienced that as I was growing up. I got tired of being afraid. But that is a lie. Our purpose is not to throw polygamist husbands and fathers in jail. It's to convince all polygamists everywhere to check out your false doctrines that propels your belief in polygamy, to discard the false doctrine and to accept the truths of pure biblical teaching, turn your lives over to the cleansing blood of Jesus Christ, and that would take care of the polygamy problem. Now, we do discuss on this program legal issues, and we agree that crimes within polygamy groups should be dealt with just like crimes in all of society. And but we do not suggest that we arrest and throw polygamists in jail. Ignoring the illegal problem of polygamy is not the answer, and sending them all to jail isn't the answer either. But Jesus is the answer, and His truth will set all polygamists free. Now, I have a couple of telephone messages that I want to very quickly answer before we introduce our guest. A couple of weeks ago, we had a telephone message from initials TT. He didn't give his names. He's from Roy, and he said, I know 3 families who are living polygamy, and their lives are all positive, loving, no incest, and children are going to college. Well, I'm always happy to hear about happy families, polygamist or otherwise, but my response to that is, so what? You see, polygamy has never been commanded by God. Polygamy will never bring anyone closer to God, and polygamy will certainly not open up the gates of heaven to anyone. Polygamy is against the Utah Constitution. It's against the laws of Utah. It's against the laws of the United States. It's wrong and it's illegal. And it doesn't matter if they're happy. I mean, the Bible tells us that people are happy in their sins. But polygamy is wrong. It's morally wrong and it's illegal, so it doesn't matter if they're happy. And then I received a card from a viewer in Cedar City. She said, Dear Doris, is polygamy illegal in Utah, in Arizona, in the United States? And of course, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And she continues to say, how come women can't have more than one husband? One to cook, one to clean, one to make money, and one for all those special occasions. She said, keep up the good works, and signed her name, Joyce. Thank you, Joyce, for your encouraging email. But she has a P.S., and this is the important part of her message. She says, the gospel is in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 1 through 4, and all we have to do is believe that. And that is so true. Pull out your Bibles, dust the dust off of it, blow it off, clean up the Bible, and open it to 1 Corinthians 15, verses 1 through 4. You will read the true gospel of Jesus Christ. It is so simple. A child can believe it. A child can do it. And all you have to do is believe it. Also read John 6:29. That confirms that. And then read Galatians chapter 1 that tells us, warns us that if anybody changes, adds to, or takes away from the gospel, they're under a curse. This is serious stuff, folks. Very serious. And thank you, Joyce, for your card. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's guest. She has experienced the faithful life of being an LDS church member. Then, following the early Mormon doctrine, she and her husband investigated fundamentalism and discovered the true teachings of early Mormon prophets. They lived a polygamous lifestyle after investigating different polygamy groups and joining one of them. But she discovered that none of these experiences satisfied the deep emptiness within. I'd like you to meet Marisa Vandenbos. Right? Did I say your name right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank
you. Welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I want to be able to reach those people and help those people that were in the same boat that I was in, unhappy in polygamy, and want to be able to help them as well.
And you know, it takes a lot of courage, folks. It takes a lot of courage to come on the show, a live TV show, and tell your story.
Yes.
And I appreciate it, and I want to thank you very much for coming and doing this. So you've got quite a story to tell. When we first talked, I think it took 3 hours to tell it. So we've got about, 25 minutes to do it. So let's get started on your story, starting from the beginning, your marriage to your husband in the LDS temple.
We were first married in the LDS temple, like you say, and it wasn't long after that I remember that we were married that he said to me at one point, someday we're going to live polygamy. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, thinking, when the millennium comes or when it comes back, like they've always said that it may come back. And so I thought, well, okay, but that's a long ways away. Well, it wasn't. It was quite some time. It was 13 years later. And we were active in the church, and I had a position in the primary, and he was in a priesthood meeting, and he was quarreling back and forth about one of the letters that had come from the first presidency, and he thought that he had rights, and that he felt like the first presidency was taking those rights away from him. And finally, in the priesthood meeting, the teacher said, look, and his name was Johann, he said, sit down and shut up or leave. Because
now, your husband's name was Johann,
yeah,
not the teacher.
My husband's name was Johann.
Okay.
And so, so he got up and left. And I continued, going to church and fulfilling my calling. And he stayed home after that. He just
never went back.
Didn't want to go. And he saw a program that was coming on, and he taped it at one point. And one of these weeks, he was sitting at home on a Sunday when I was at church and thought, you know what, maybe I'll watch that program that I recorded some time ago. So he went and pulled it off the shelf and put in this. It was called The Matter of Principle, and it was put out by the All Red Group. An All Red Group. Mm-hmm. And he watched it and immediately felt like there was a testimony there that Owen had the priesthood.
Okay.
So
Owen Allred is the leader of
He was the leader then. Yeah.
Okay.
Then he was.
Right, at that time.
At that time, yeah. And so when I came home from church, of course, he was excited, and told me about it, and I thought, oh my gosh, polygamy already? Wait a minute, it's not time.
It's not ready, yeah.
And so he just told me to watch it, and I watched it, and I thought it was interesting and everything. And
were you convinced of anything when you?
No, I wasn't. Not then. I mean, looked interesting, and the church talks about polygamy, and I mean, it's in the history.
What?
And so it seemed like, well, that seems logical. I don't remember the program anymore. It's been too many years.
Now, did the church also at that time, the LDS church, teach that polygamy was also in the future? We know it's in the past. Were they still preaching it was in the future?
It seems to me I had heard in growing up that it would be. It would come back sometime. I don't know if they meant that was my understanding.
Right.
I don't know about anybody else, but that was my understanding, that it would come back sometime, maybe in the millennium or something.
Right.
I'm not,
yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't remember because and so.
So you watched the Matter of Principle.
So we watched the Matter of Principle, and he called the building, and they sent out missionaries and encouraged us to read the Book of Mormon and to study, of course, the Doctrine and Covenants, section 32, and just get a testimony first of the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. And so we did that, and they continued to come and visit us from time to time, and it took some time, and deep down I think I wasn't sure about it, but he was finally in a spiritual place that I'd always wanted him to be.
Okay.
And so it seemed really, really good for our marriage to finally be in this spiritual place that I always wanted my husband to be in at the time.
You said it took some time for this to happen. About how much time did it take?
Well, from the time of that we watched the tape until about the time that we decided that we were going to be to join and be baptized was about 6 months.
Okay.
And just a funny story. We were living with my in-laws at the time, and during that time, let me back up here. During that time, we would go to church on Sundays there, and we would go visit Dennis Matthews and Jeff Norman, who you've spoken about in other previous shows. And we visited their families and got to know their wives very well. And one night we were sitting at the dinner table, and my little sweet innocent daughter said, we go to these people's house and they've got one daddy and a whole bunch of mommies. So we were kind of caught there. But we just mentioned that we were just going to another ward with some friends that we enjoyed being with and stuff.
And that was to his folks.
And that was his folks. My dad, on the other hand, we had told him, and he wasn't too happy about it. And he asked us if we would visit have an audience with a general authority. And we agreed to do that. And so he set up an appointment, and we went and we saw one of the general authorities of the church and visited with him. And I didn't hear a lot of the conversation because I was in the background with a fussy baby at the time. But during the conversation, there was one acknowledgement, and that was he said to Johann, he commended him for wearing the long garment. Because by then we had been sealed through, we had been through the All-Red Endowment House, and we had been sealed.
Oh.
And so we then had the long garment that was the original garment that they had years ago.
Okay.
And this elder in the church commended him for wearing the long garment. So to him, that was telling him that what we are doing is right, that we are with the priesthood. This is the church. It has to be separate, which is what they teach in the polygamist church, that we are the All Red group is the priesthood group of the church. And the church is still correct, but without the priesthood.
Okay. Now, how did this general authority know your husband was wearing long garments? Did he tell him?
He just, yeah, he did tell him. Okay. Yeah, in the conversation, he told him. Or there was conversation about it. So, let me think here.
Okay, you were building a house in Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, and so we left, and as we were leaving, the elder said, you know, just kind of put his hand on my shoulder and said, if you ever need to talk, let me know. And so I said, okay, you know. So we went on, and we were building a house in Mount Pleasant at the time. We moved to Mount Pleasant, and we had found that land long before we even found the polygamist. It just took us several years to build the house there. And so we weren't moving there because of the Harmston group or any of those groups. In fact, the Harmston group hadn't even developed too much by the time we had moved there. They developed while we were down there. And
you mentioned in your notes that you had heard about John Llewellyn. You'd never met him. Of course, he's been on our show.
He's been on your show.
And then an interesting tidbit about your dad had worked with Owen and his...
that was another interesting thing. My dad had worked with Owen at the same refinery.
And you're talking about Owen Allred, who was the leader of the Allred group.
He knew Owen. He knew Owen very well, and had seen him on the phone numerous times working out problems with all his wives. So that was one of the reasons. I don't know how many wives Owen had. That's not a question you asked. How many wives do you have?
Okay.
You know, it's just kind of, unless you go to their homes and you see all their wives or whatever, but it's not a question you would ask. How many wives do you have? You know, it's kind of like, how much money do you make?
But he was on the phone always putting out fires with them.
He was always putting out fires with the wives, and my dad saw that, and that was one of his concerns, that he didn't want to see, of course, his daughter unhappy, you know, with all these other wives, and having Johann always putting out fires.
Yeah.
And so...
Okay.
So we moved on down to Mount Pleasant. We lived there for a while. We weren't finding any wives, and you don't just go in and people maybe think that you just join a group and there's lots of women and you can just pick a wife. It's not the way it is. It's a little more complicated than that.
Right.
And also, you know, they don't mind outsiders coming in, but they're very careful, especially the main people like the Barlows and the Allreds and, you know, all the main polygamist groups. They don't just hand their daughters over to the newcomers.
When someone new comes in, like the two of you did as a couple, as a family, do you apply for membership or do they invite you for membership? How?
No, it's the same as like any other church. You just, you know, they ask you if you want to be a member, or you say, I want to be a member, I want to do this, and there's questions that are asked, of course, and then they make that decision and baptize you. You know, you set up an appointment and you get baptized. And our baptism was very beautiful. I had forgotten, and I was reading in my journal, and a couple came there, and they were playing their guitar and singing, you know, while we were preparing, and went in there, and it was, you know, like any other spiritual meeting. And the one thing that really did intrigue me was when we went to the meetings, the people are very, very kind. There's a lot of love. Even though there's a lot of deceit and there's a lot of, you know, other things going on, there is a lot of love among the group. And that's what convinced me, is I could feel the love. And it's interesting because I would walk in the building and I'd see all these people, and I thought, I know all these people, you know. But as time went on, I realized I grew up with these people. A lot of the people that were there went to Murray High, and you know, I grew up with them in the Salt Lake Valley and saw them throughout the years, going to basketball games to the school, you know. And then one of them knew my oldest brother very well and said, say hi, you know, as I got to know him. And so I knew the people. They were familiar to me when I went there.
So were they polygamists when you knew them in school then?
Yeah, but I didn't realize that.
But you didn't know that. Yeah, they don't let you know that.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah. So, interesting. Well, you know, there are a lot of wonderful people in polygamy groups. A lot of they're just deceived.
They are, but
they're so deceived.
Yeah. So to move on, because I know we're short on time, we were far away from the churches. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll investigate, because he wanted to find another wife. He wanted to enter the principal, as you call it. And so we went to the Harmston group and visited their meeting one Sunday. And that was very interesting, because we were sitting there, and Jim Harmston and some of the other apostles came into the meeting before it had started, and there was a sister behind me that just, oh, can you just feel the spirit of that man? And I'm sure she could. I'm sure she could feel his energy and his love for her. But she just dwelt on the love and the energy and the spirit that man just brought into that room. And I'm sitting there, and I didn't feel anything. And it was at that meeting that he secretly announced that he was going to start swapping wives. And we saw somebody there at church that had been in the All Red group and had joined the Harmston group. And his wife was taken away from him, and he was devastated. But she said, you know what, if he says it, we should do it. And she went and married some other, and this is a couple that had been married and were probably, believe they were in the church and came here. And all of a sudden there's this small community of polygamists, and all of those wives don't belong with those men, but they belong with the men that are in this particular group. You know, it's very strange. And when you say that this woman can feel the spirit, this is the spirit of God, because he doesn't do this kind of wife swapping and all of that. No, of course not.
Now I'd like to mention to our viewers that we'll open up the phone lines right now. You can begin to call in if you want to have a question for Marisa about her life and her experiences. It'll still be a few minutes before we'll take your calls, but at least you can be calling in and getting in line with the telephone calls. So just go ahead.
Okay. We also went to Colorado City and visited down there to see. We had gone on a trip down to California and thought we'd just slip over to Colorado City.
Now, were you thinking of moving from the All Red group to perhaps another group? Is that why you were visiting?
No, he was just kind of looking for wives.
Okay.
That, you know, and he probably would have. I don't know that we would have joined another group or not to get a wife, but actually, I'm trying to think of timeline here. Maybe that was after we had another wife, because he was excommunicated from the polygamous group as well. We were both excommunicated from the church. And so maybe the timeline was, maybe this was after he took a wife, we went to Colorado City. And because he was excommunicated from the All Red group as well, because he married my sister wife, well, I'll get to that later, but it was not proper in the eyes of the All Red group.
Yeah.
And so that could have been why we went down there, because maybe he was searching. But when we went down there, we realized that this group, the leaders told the people who they had to marry, who they could marry.
Right.
You didn't get to choose.
Right.
See, and this is why we went with the All Red group to begin with, because they seemed like the most common and the one that came true from the church. rather than all these that just sprung up. And that's why we went to the Albright group, because they seemed like they had more truths of the, of the
There seemed to be
basis
less
from the-
controlling too
Yes,
than most of the other
yeah,
polygamy
they were
groups.
quite a bit less controlling. Whereas the Colorado City, they told you who and when you married.
And the Kingston groups is basically the same way.
Yeah. So anyway, get on to the courtship. This gal, we knew another family that lived about 30 miles from us, and ironically, it was one of the missionaries, the gentleman that came and taught us the principle when we were investigating. And by now, his daughter was about 14 years old and was interested in Johann and wanted to pursue him. Now, the process is you go to your father and you say, I'm interested in this man. And if the father says that's okay, then you go to the leader and you say, I want to court this man, or vice versa. The man goes to the father of the daughter, and the father will contact the daughter, and then they contact the leader. Well, she had gone to Owen, and he told her no, she could not court. She was too young. So, because he didn't want any legal issues.
Yeah.
And so, she, after a few weeks or months, she asked again, can I please court him? And, and he's like, no. He said, you can mingle with family together, your families together, and be friends and do things together, but you're not to court him.
Now, were he and her eyeing each other? I mean, were they
She was
making
eyeing him,
contact?
but as soon as he knew that, here was this beautiful dark-haired girl that basically what he always wanted was a dark-haired woman. What would you do if you were a 30-year-old man and a 14-year-old girl was attracted to you? I mean,
And wanting to pursue you.
wanting to pursue you, sure. He was excited that this young girl was falling head over heels over him.
Okay.
So he pursued to. They pursued to go to Owen again, and this time he and Marianne went together, and the sister wife went together, and they asked him again. And of course, it's like a child when they ask and ask and ask. He finally just said, okay. So he said, okay, you can court, but that's as far as it goes. And then it went to, can we get married? And he's like, no, she's too young. And he said, I can't do that. I will be in trouble legally if I marry you at this age. And she was 14, almost 15. So.
And didn't you have a daughter that was a year older than her?
No. She could have been our daughter because she was born, we were married in December and she was born in October by her parents. So she could have been our...
Oh, she was born a year after you were married.
Yeah, she could have been our daughter.
Yeah.
My daughter, we waited 5 years to have children. So my daughter was about three years younger than her.
Okay.
So when I left, my daughter was 14.
Well, that still puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does.
Okay, so they courted and...
They courted and he decided since Owen would not marry them since she was too young, he would make it a legal situation. So we pursued to get a divorce. Of course, in the polygamy world, the paper means nothing. Right. Marriage paper means nothing. It's just a piece of paper saying you're married.
Yeah.
It's the sealing with God that makes it all right. So for us to get a divorce, it didn't matter. We were still sealed because it's just a piece of paper here on this earth. So we went and got a legal divorce so that he could go. We went to Las Vegas because you could marry young girls in Las Vegas, not here. So we went with her parents to Las Vegas to get married.
And her parents were all for it.
And her parents were for it because, of course, they believed in the principle as well.
Right. Okay.
So we thought. So we went down there. We got married. It took a day. we ended up spending the night because we found out that we had to have a judge sign the papers. You couldn't just go to Vegas and get married like most people do. Because of her age, it had to be signed by a judge with the parents. So they did all that formality. They got married. We came home, and he's like, well, now that we've done it legally, Owen won't get in trouble. So he went to Owen and said, Owen, will you seal us? And he said, no. And it's because her father told Owen not to.
Is that right? I wonder why.
He was too much of a coward to stand up to Johan and say, I do not want them married.
My goodness.
And so...
so did he go to Vegas with you? He went to Vegas?
He went to Vegas. He did the whole shebang. And he made Johan promise that he would not consummate the marriage unless Owen sealed them. So behind our backs, he went to Owen and said, do not seal them. Because he really didn't want it to go through, but he couldn't stand up to Johan and say, I don't want it to happen. Or to his daughter.
What a web is woven, huh?
Uh-huh, yeah, yep. So, so he took her home, and they weren't as far
lived
as
in your home.
His dad. No, my sister wife's dad took her home, and we went home, and Johan was just devastated by this. So we.
How did you feel about it? Were you relieved, or were you secretly?
Well, you know, I was excited about her coming into the family. I really was, because we were excited because she was a cute gal, and we meet and principal as well, because I saw some advantages in it, and so I was excited for it.
At that time.
At that did I know how it would turn out.
Right. Yeah,
but I was a little bit excited. And our marriage was not the greatest marriage anyway. So that was one of the reasons I joined, because he was a very controlling husband, and I thought this would get him off of my back as the control, and he would have another little hen to, to fuss over and be controlling over, and I would have more freedom to do what I wanted to do. Right. Because he was somewhat controlling anyway.
It doesn't ever turn out quite that way, does it? Well, we've got a couple of phone calls here. Let's answer them, and then we'll continue on with your story. So on line 1, we have Rob from Salt Lake City. Hello, Rob.
Hello.
Hello, Rob. You're on the air.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question for you was: have you guys, either one of you, ever read the book Under the Banner of Heaven?
Yes, I have. Have you?
I have not.
Yes, I've read it.
So one of you has and one of you hasn't?
Uh-huh.
No, I have not read it.
Okay.
It's a very good book.
For those who have read it, what did you think about the portrayal that John Krakauer described about the sister wives of some of the polygamists down in Colorado City and along the Arizona Strip?
Well, to be honest with you, whenever I read a book like that, it would bring back memories of, even though different polygamy groups act and have different policies, it still is the same devastation emotionally to the people in the groups. And that's what it did to me. It just brought me to tears too many times that this kind of deceit and manipulation continued to take place in the polygamous lives and families.
Yeah, and it is amazing how long the women let it go on for. But I guess, like Marisa was saying, they're very controlling husbands and such on the other end. And sometimes you're afraid to get out, or a lot of times I've heard, and read that you're excommunicated or totally shunned from the group and you're out on your own.
That happens, true, and go ahead.
And also, Rob, when you're sealed for time and all eternity, it's hard to break away because you've made that sealing, and especially when you think that you have gone even that step further into a higher law, that you cannot break away from that law because you will be damned, as Doris has said many times. You will be damned if you leave that higher law, you leave those covenants. And so that's also what makes it so hard to leave a family and your husband like that.
And it's the fear, again, it's the fear that they instill. It's just it's inherent in polygamy groups. In fact, 2 weeks from tonight, one of our show is going to be about vows, the sealings and the vows that women make in these ceremonies, and how we're going to show from the Bible they are not valid and the women don't have to fear leaving. So that's going to be coming up in a future show. Does that answer your question, Rob?
That sounds pretty positive, yeah. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thanks for calling in.
All right.
Good night. Okay, Danny in line 3. Hello, Danny.
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes.
Yes, you need to turn your TV down.
Okay.
What is your question?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just talking to a Latter-day Saint a few weeks ago about polygamy, and he mentioned that the 12 tribes of Israel was established from 4 different women by the same husband. Now, was all these women in polygamy, or were they basically from different time frames? Maybe Jacob lived a long time, and that these women died off, or was they actually? I couldn't answer it.
Okay.
And I was just wondering if you could answer that for me.
That's one of their justifications. Actually, someone else's sin doesn't justify anyone else's sin, but that's what they like to do constantly. Yes, if you read Genesis, you can start in about chapter 30, around there, Genesis chapter 30. You'll read the story of Jacob. He was tricked into taking more than one wife. And it's a sordid story of jealousy and manipulation and sadness and pain and it's just very, very sad. God has His ways of turning what man does that are hurtful to good, and that's what He has done many, many times, and He did that with the 12 tribes of Israel. Just because Israelites came from a polygamous beginning with Jacob does not mean, and you will never find in the Bible where God has commanded or condoned polygamy.
Okay, yeah, and that's definitely the way I believe. I know that when Israel wanted to choose a king, that God definitely commanded that the king only be a man of one wife.
Right.
And I know that's what, but just in this particular case, I was kind of like throwing sideways, and I'm saying, well, I can't answer that right now.
Yeah.
So, but I think you helped me out quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling, Danny. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, so let's continue on with your.
Okay, let's see, where did we leave off?
She had moved into
okay.
the home, and at that point you were kind of happy with what was going on, but the sad part hadn't happened yet.
Time went on, and things got difficult. There was a time though before when they were during that month that they weren't. She didn't live with us. You know, it was very difficult because they would. She would come over like a date, and he would take her home. And I was pregnant with my 5th child at the time.
Wow.
And they would go out when they left. They'd go out and sit in the car, and it would run for 5-10 minutes, and they'd do whatever they were doing out there. And then he'd take her home, and he'd come back home around 2 in the morning. Well, this particular night, he was sitting out there, and the car ran for like 30 minutes, and I was just getting hysterical. And I had a nervous breakdown. I was so upset that I started crying and cried hysterically for nearly a half an hour. And I realized what was happening, and so I controlled myself, and I knew for the baby it wasn't good. So I started trying to control myself, and I was okay. And then he finally came home, and the minute he walked in the door, I burst out again. And it was very hard. And I think I don't know if he understood what I was going through, but it let him know how difficult this was for me.
So do you think that you finally was getting in touch with your emotions?
I think so.
Because it isn't natural for a woman to share her husband. That just is not a natural thing.
No, and it was difficult, and my main part was if he was with me during the day and gave me the attention that I needed, I was somewhat okay. But when he didn't give me the attention during the day and somewhat in the nights, I was not happy. And as time went on, she finally decided just to stay with us and live with us. And she just told her dad, "Too bad, I'm married to my husband. I'm going to be here. This is where I belong. He's my priesthood leader, and this is where I'm going to stay." And so from then on, we lived our life. And he didn't sleep with me a whole lot.
After that.
Once in a while, he slept with me. And the last year of our life, he didn't sleep with me at all. And I would, go to them and say, "Well, I don't even feel like your wife anymore. I'm just the maid." Was
he punishing you, or did he just have a greater appeal for her?
I think that, and he was worried that she had had a baby by then, and he was concerned that she wouldn't hear the baby in the night, because many times she didn't. I said, but I hear the baby. I can get up and go and make sure she gets the baby and make sure things are okay. But that was his excuse. He would come down and be with me for an hour in the evening once in a while, and then go back up and spend the night with her. And it made it more difficult. And I was reading in my journal, preparing for this show, and it was interesting because this was about a year and a half into our marriage, and I wrote, "So far, this kind of life is not agreeing with me. I love Becky very much, but I'm sad to say I'm not very happy. I guess I've got a lot of growing to do. I hope someday I will be different and I will be happy." So then again, I was putting it on myself. This is my fault. I'm not happy. I have to grow.
That is inherent in the polygamy group. In every group, that is exactly what they do. It's your fault.
Yeah. And so I had to grow from this experience. Even though I wasn't happy, I had to grow from it so that someday I would be happy. So,
well, let's take a couple more phone calls here. We have James from Sandy calling. Hello, James.
Hello.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, what's your question?
Well, I was listening to you guys speak a little bit about polygamy, and I heard you mention something about justification.
Well, I was talking about how sometimes the people will justify their own sins by bringing up other people's sins. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, as far as justification goes, have you ever met, like when you guys talk about polygamy, are you guys talking about one person being married to two people at the same time?
Are you familiar with polygamy in Utah?
Yeah.
Well, there's several different polygamy groups. There's tens of thousands of polygamists in the Intermountain West. It's where men will take more than one wife, sometimes dozens of wives. Mostly, it's usually 4 or 5 or 6 extra wives.
Oh, okay. So, you've actually met people, you yourself have actually met people
James,
who marry,
James,
5 or 6 wives in one lifetime?
Yes. James, we're talking to a woman who was in a polygamous situation. She's telling her story of being in a polygamous group. I was born and raised in a polygamous group. And I know firsthand, I knew people, I grew up with polygamists. I know, so that's what we're talking about, yes.
Oh, okay, because, I know the gentleman speaking before me was talking about some LDS, talking to him about polygamy that's happened in ancient times. What exactly is there proof-wise that, that still goes on, other than certain individuals?
We are the proof.
Individuals, not necessarily their groups.
Yeah, we are proof.
Yeah, we're proof.
I had a sister wife, and I knew many men that had 5 and 6 wives.
And my father was a polygamist. He had more than one wife.
So it's more of an individual thing. Individuals doing polygamy, not necessarily, any specific group, not,
Yes.
LDS, not...
Well, the LDS
anything like that.
started, the LDS brought polygamy to Utah. It was the LDS who started Mormon fundamentalism in the United States. And there are...
The thing with LDS is, okay, they do not marry in one lifetime. When a husband's wife dies, he can be resealed in the temple to a second spouse.
But what I said was that, James, what I said was that the LDS started it. They brought it here. They don't do it now, but they think they will in the future. But there are tens of thousands of polygamists now as a result.
Okay, so you don't think that ever would have happened had LDS never brought polygamy to Utah?
No. If Joseph Smith hadn't did what he did, no, it wouldn't.
So you're saying that strictly because of what Joseph Smith believed,
Yes.
that tens of thousands of people now
Yes.
are practicing polygamy.
Yes, that's his legacy.
Even though LDS preach against polygamy.
But Joseph Smith started the LDS Church, sir. They started it. They are the ones who brought it here. They brought it from Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Wilford Woodruff, Heber C. Kimball, John Taylor. They brought it here, and they threatened and preached for years, for decades, that if you didn't practice polygamy, you were going to go right straight to hell. You would be damned if you didn't live it. That was what they taught.
Well, I mean, there's several places, in I'm sure you're familiar with Doctrine and Covenants.
Very much.
I'm sure you're familiar with Doctrine and Covenants where they talk about polygamy and not necessarily justification, but exactly what their terms of polygamy were.
Well, their terms of polygamy is that a man must be a polygamist or he can't attain celestial glory. He can't become a god. And of course, they all want to become gods, which is very self-serving. And the woman would be damned if she didn't comply. That's what.
I mean, have you ever read Doctrine and Covenants?
Yes, I have. And we have another call I'd like to get to. What is your point?
Oh, I'm just wondering if you've read Doctrine and Covenants, maybe you should read the areas where it talks about a man being married to one wife to achieve exaltation.
Section 132 probably is what you're talking about, and that is the section that talks about polygamy and that you must live polygamy or be damned. So anyway, I'm going to go to our next call, and I would like to thank you, James, for calling in. Hope we answered your question.
Thank you.
Good night. Okay, Jim in Spanish Fork. Hello, Jim. Jim? Jim? Turn your...
Yes, ma'am.
Turn your TV down, please.
And I was wondering, I had a question earlier. Being like you guys, or like you, I was a Mormon, and I realized the strong faith you can have. But the question I had for the lady next to you was, do you think that him believing in what he did, Mr. Jeff, that he wanted to marry your husband's 14-year-old wife in a celestial marriage where he could let you have her on an earthly thing, he really possibly believes that he'll be married to her in heaven,
Oh, yeah.
So he's being kind of greedy, if that's the case.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to say before I left is I hope I don't meet Joseph Smith up there or I'm in deep trouble.
He's not there, Jim. I can guarantee you.
Oh.
I have biblical proof of that. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, ma'am, and I love your show, and like all of you there, I've been in the Mormon Church and then been brokenhearted because I went through the covenants and things necessary, and that broke my heart when I found out that I've been living a lie, my sisters and all that. And I just, I can see how people could really break their hearts when they find out the truth,
Well, it's
Good
nice to
morning.
know the truth too, Jim. I'm so grateful that I discovered the truth. It's hard to know you've been deceived, but it's still nice to know the truth. So, well, you got your TV turned on. We getting close to the end of the show, Jim. So I hope we answered your question. Good night.
Oh, yeah, man. That was my question about the celestial marriage to Jeff. He wanted the girl, the 14-year-old girl, instead of her. That was my question.
Oh,
Realizing
okay.
that he may have wanted her. She was wondering the reason why she couldn't be married celestially.
Okay, Jim, it's the end of the show. We really have to turn off now. Thank you. Good night. I'm not sure I understood his question.
I didn't understand his question either.
We're at the 2-minute mark here, so we do appreciate your coming and telling your story.
Thank you for having me.
And hope that many people are encouraged to know that you can leave an abusive polygamous situation. And because we know that God doesn't show favoritism, and because the practice of the polygamy, men or women and children are the ones who are hurt the most, we know that polygamy could never have come from the heart of God. Polygamy is a heavy burden that man has placed on women. God has not done that. And Jesus said in the Bible, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." If you're in a polygamist relationship, ask yourself these questions. Are you being loved and cherished to the full extent that God requires a man to love his wife? Does your husband love each child of each wife equally and give them the attention that each child needs? If you're weary, and if you're a mother in a polygamy group and a wife and you're weary and you feel like you're heavy laden and you have a load that's too heavy to bear, do you face each day with the fear and the emotions of jealousy and loneliness that you wish that you didn't have to experience each and every day? Jesus can make them go away. He came to take our heavy load and give us the easy load that He carries. Your husband cannot bring you into salvation. Only Jesus Christ can do that. Your husband cannot save you. He can't even save himself, so how could he save you too? Only Jesus has the authority and the power to save a soul. So Jesus tells us to believe and trust in Him alone for salvation, and that's what we ask you to do. His burden is light. He promises you'll find rest for your souls. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next week.